Starting. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Brittany Higginbotham. I'm Communications and Outreach Manager with the Institute for Public Relations. We are thrilled to have you here for our webinar based on the findings from our latest report on the disinformation in our fifth edition of the Disinformation in Society report. This is a study surveying 2,000 U.S. adults to assess what sources they trust the most, how Americans perceive false or misleading information, who they hold responsible for spreading it, and what actions they believe are necessary to combat it. Today we have report authors Dr. Tina McCorkindale, President and CEO of IPR, and Dave Schultz, Chief Strategy Officer at Leger, to unpack the findings and answer all of your questions on our latest signature study. A few housekeeping notes. This is being recorded and it will be available for playback within 24 hours, and then it be emailed to all of our registrants today. We have a Q&A session throughout, so please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to get those answered. And then if you have any tech difficulties, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to assist. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tina to get us started.
Hi, everyone, and happy Tuesday. I feel like I just froze, which is a bad start for a webinar, but it'll be fine. So I'm really happy today to be joined by my co-host, Dave Scholes from Leger, who's been a great partner in this work I think, Dave, we've done this a few times, and it's one of my favorite studies that we do because I think it's so impactful and also important for our field. So let's go ahead and just get right into it because we have a lot of data to present. So the first thing I want to do is define what we mean by disinformation versus misinformation. Misinformation is false or misleading information, but it doesn't have an intent to deceive. It's just like if you erroneously said something or you just put like a misquoted or something that wasn't factual in, whereas disinformation is deliberately false or misleading with an intent to mislead. So that's the primary difference between the two. Now, when we give the report and in the survey, when we ask questions, we don't specifically use the term at the beginning, disinformation and misinformation. We define what it is and then ask a question. One of the reasons why we give a definition as to what it is that way everyone is on the same page and we're not asking people to interpret the language that we're using. So we do provide a definition. So use that in your mind. Now, throughout the questions that we do ask, we generally ask disinformation, except for the one where we ask about the top issues in society that Dave will talk about. Okay, so this is a great example of what you see as disinformation. So I just want to sort of level set where we are. And with AI, it's just going to get more sophisticated. Now, there are a few like telltale signs of when you see disinformation with AI. So I'm sure a lot of you saw this picture during Hurricane Helene of this little girl with her puppy. I know I saw it on my Facebook as well, and people sharing the devastation. Now, if you look at this poor girl, she has like an extra finger, which should not be there in the middle. So there's usually like telltale signs of, it could be something like the dog where the fur doesn't look right. You know, she has clearly a lot more wrinkles than a 2 or 3-year-old should have. So there are sort of signs, but with this, the emotion here, so you see President Trump walking through, clearly that's not him. But when you see this sort of visual, the purpose of it is to create some sort of emotion in you. It could be anger, but that is to get you to share the disinformation. So disinformation is more likely to be shared at 6 times faster of a rate than just regular factual information. So this is a great example of you can see also that disinformation gets a lot of clicks, and that's one of the reasons why there is disinformation. Okay, so here's why you should care. There's so many reasons why you should care about disinformation. In addition to just of a societal level, like making sure that we have a strong democracy where we are united together Instead, it creates polarization. It incites division and hate. That's another sign of disinformation. If it causes people to be angry and angry at one group over another group, that may be more likely to be disinformation. For organizations, it also has a big impact because it harms reputation. It decreases the trustworthiness of sources that we have. And also, it changes how audiences engage. And we're seeing that with the changing media landscape. And you'll see that here in some of the results that we have in the study. But what we also find is that it also affects people personally. It affects their well being and their mental health. So it does have a huge impact on the work that we do. All right, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dina. And again, we're very happy to be partnering with IPR on this. This is our third year being involved in the study. If you can just go to the next slide. Just a little bit about this piece of research. So we've done this research in the past in 2021, 2023. We did a Canada-specific study in 2022. And now we've done this past one, which was fielded in March of this year. It is 2,000 nationally representative sample of U.S. adults weighted by census data to make sure that it is accurately representing the U.S. population. If you can go to the next one. And what we've done over the years is we've started with talking to people about what are the major issues confronting you right now. And this year, number one issue, according to Americans, is healthcare costs, followed by the economy and homelessness. But I think the telling thing is in the top five, or tied for fifth, is misinformation in the news. And we didn't start the study saying we were discussing misinformation or disinformation at this point. This was just what are the top issues for you? And that's increased by 9% compared with last year. So it is something that is definitely growing and is becoming more and more an issue for Americans to deal with. Next.
Okay. And then if you notice like what people think that it is on par with is like federal spending, hunger and poverty, and illegal drug use and abuse. And then I'll just add to what Dave said, the arrows that are pointing up, that means that's percentage points. So for example, if you see healthcare cost at 80% and then it has plus 8 percentage points, it means that the last time we did this study, which was in November of 2023, that healthcare cost actually met at 72%. So when you see the arrows throughout, up or down, that means in reference to the last time we did the study. And again, that is percentage points, not percentage. All right, so here's questions that we ask every year, except we did add the one, disinformation significantly influenced the outcome of the last US presidential election. If you notice how we word the questions, they're not leaning or biased toward one political party or another. So we want to make sure that they are very neutral how we're asking questions. So if you see in most of the cases in the top section, you have nearly 3/4 who said it's commonplace, it increases polarization, and then a little less than 2/3 talks about how it infringes on human rights. And then you have 50%, almost half of the respondents who said that they do believe that disinformation significantly influenced the outcome of the presidential election. But of course, that doesn't say in terms of how or what. And then, very few people said actually that disinformation is exaggerated. Is there anything you wanted to add to the slide, Dave?
No, but I want to go to the next one because I think it ties in closely to this. When you think about 70% of Americans saying that disinformation is very important to them, and then you start talking about the bottom right point here, encountering disinformation makes me feel anxious or stressed. That has increased. So now 50% of Americans agree that when they see information, they feel some sort of anxiety coming through. And that's grown by 3 percentage points since 2023 when we did this study. But beyond that, in the bottom left, if someone I know shares this information, it gets me upset. It gets me angry. And I'm worried about accidentally sharing disinformation. That was at 42% 2 years ago. Now it's at 47%. So that's growing. But it's interesting in that people feel they're sharing less disinformation knowingly. So if they are sharing it, they don't know that they've shared it. And they do feel they have a personal responsibility to correct disinformation when they encounter it. but yet they're viewing news sources that align with their personal beliefs. So, one of the things that we did in the Canadian study and in the study in 2021 was we looked at what is misinformation or disinformation? And a lot of it aligns with your political beliefs, the news sources you watch. What one person feels is disinformation may be real news to someone else, and vice versa. So it's a very murky area when it comes to what's being shared.
Yes, and Dave, I'm really glad that the I've knowingly shared disinformation went down 2 percentage points.
Yes.
Okay, so we added some questions about artificial intelligence, of course, because it's such a big issue. And so we asked whether it would create more disinformation in society, and it was pretty similar to last time with that first question. And then we added whether people believe that they often encounter disinformation created by artificial intelligence. And then that was, 1/3 of individuals said they do believe that they often do. Last time we did this study was in November 2023. So ChatGPT was around, but it wasn't used as much as it is today. But what we did see is that people have more trust in ChatGPT now than they did in 2023. And in fact, which is a pretty big jump, is that distrust has decreased by 14 percentage points for also usage of ChatGPT.
But to the quick point is that whether people believe they're encountering disinformation created by it or not is difficult. That picture that Tina showed at the beginning with the child in the boat with the dog and the extra fingers, it took me a long time of searching before I even recognized that there was extra fingers. So a lot of people just aren't aware of what they're encountering on a regular basis. So when they do look for what's trustworthy to them, if we can go to the next slide.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. People find that, like we found in every study that we've done on this topic, my family, people like me, my friends, my personal sources are the most trustworthy when it comes to providing news and information to me. And that's just increased. So, to a certain degree, we're becoming more insular in terms of where we look to for information than before. Now, we did see an increase in trust in a lot of the institutions, different news sources, ABC, NBC. We saw growth there in terms of trust. And we consistently see trust in terms of local broadcast and newspapers. But up heads and shoulders above everything, it's people like me and my friends and family that I'm trusting the most, which are, again, not formal institutions, but that's where we're going.
All right. So, one of the reasons why we look at differences in terms of political affiliation is that's typically where we see the most significant differences. Now, when we do this study with Leger, there is a whole range of different demographic variables that are collected. And then when we look at where are the major differences, it typically lies with political affiliation. And it's been that way since we started doing the study. So what we look is at differences between mainstream media sources, and by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just the ones that had the most trust and so on. So we have a bunch of different sources that we do ask. But what you can see is that there are pretty significant percentage point differences between Republicans and Democrats. So take, for instance, ABC News, that 78% of Democrats trust at least some in ABC News compared to 43% of Republicans, which is a 35 percentage point difference between the two. Now, what's really interesting, if you're looking closely at this data, is for Republicans, the most trusted news source is Fox News. In fact, 2/3 of Republicans, Fox News is on the second column, third one down, but 2/3 of Republicans trust Fox News. Next to that for Republicans is local broadcast and print/online newspapers at 59%. And then after that, any other source is less than 50% for Republicans. So what that tells us is that most Republicans don't trust mainstream media. And so we see that in terms of the use in other studies as well, in terms of the sources that people use. But the local broadcast and print online newspapers has been one of the smallest gaps in terms of Republicans versus Democrats. And then you could see some of the others that have lower margins, like Bloomberg and the Financial Times, but they still don't have high trust levels for either parties as well. Okay.
And I think we need to emphasize this just a little bit more. When you're looking at a 38% difference for Fox News, and you're looking at a 35% difference for ABC and some of the mainstream media, to have a 15 to 16, and there's some rounding error in there, percentage difference points for local broadcast and print online newspapers, it's a noticeable difference in gap. So what I think it comes down to is this is the audience, this is the vehicle that we can all use to get to the most number of people to share information with, because it is on average, it's the most trusted and least distrusted group that's out there. When you start looking at beyond media outlets and you start looking at employers, there's not as big a gap between Republicans and Democrats on that. It's only a 6 percentage point. And same with major companies and corporations, there's only 2 percentage points difference. But we do see some noticeable differences when it comes to government as well. So local broadcast media, Tina, it's still the way to go.
Absolutely. Okay, and then you can see on this slide, looking at the government has there's not a significant difference between the Democrats and Republicans in terms of the U.S. government, but you see that people don't have a lot of trust in the government or trust in companies and corporations. So, all right, Dave, do you want to take this one?
No, you can have this
Oh,
one.
that's mine. Oh, thank you. All right. So we also ask questions in terms of who is the most responsible for spreading disinformation. We ask who should be responsible for combating disinformation. And we ask questions how well they are actually doing. So in this one, we ask, and this has been consistent for the last time we did the study, but who is most responsible for spreading disinformation? And at the top of the list is Facebook, which, by the way, also was at the top of the list last time, along with the federal government, political activist groups, authoritarian non-democratic governments, which, by the way, we did not ask the question like that. We said, we gave example of like China and Russia with that authoritarian non-democratic government. So we're all on the same page. But as you can see, 7 in 10 respondents believe that they are responsible for spreading disinformation to the audience. But overall, what you also see, if you look on the second, there's President Trump, there's former President Biden. What you also see is public relations professionals at 61%, which means 6 out of 10 respondents do believe that public relations professionals are at least somewhat responsible for spreading disinformation to society. Any comments about that, Dave?
Well, no, but if you go to the next slide, we break this down by some specific categories as well. So, for example, you talk about uh, public relations professionals. Look at the top 3 news sources for spreading disinformation. People think that journalists, followed by Fox News, followed by CNN, are the #1 news source at fault for spreading disinformation. Social media platforms, like Tina had said, Facebook is #1, followed by X, followed by TikTok at 2/3 of the population. The federal government is the highest in terms of government sources, in terms of spreading disinformation, even higher than political activist groups, which at some time that would not have been the case in terms of this type of research. And then even slightly, again, it's not statistically different, it's slightly higher than authoritative non-democratic governments as well in terms of spreading disinformation. And then the least likely, like we've been mentioning on who do we trust or who do we listen to, who's least likely to tell us something that's not true or to spread disinformation? It's our family, friends, people like me, people around me, people that I trust the most, my little network of people. But I mean, Tina, so I got a question for you leading to the next slide. If these are the people that we believe are spreading disinformation, what does the survey tell us about who should be stopping disinformation?
Well, Dave, I'm so glad you asked. here's here's who should be responsible. Okay, so what you'll notice is that the same people who are responsible for spreading it are also considered to be responsible for combating it. Now, if you notice the language here, this language is very responsible compared to like somewhat responsible for some of the others. So what we have is that we do have expectations from 70% of our respondents or 69% of our respondents that the US government is very responsible for combating disinformation, along with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. And then what you'll see some other elements of government sprinkled in here throughout, like the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and other branches of government. You even have, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not off the hook yet. They are also very responsible for combating disinformation. And just a reminder that this was in March of 2025, so they were no longer in office. And then you also see that people do believe that journalists and journalism related institutions are also responsible. One thing for this audience that I will point out is that corporations and CEOs, that 51% do believe that they are very responsible for combating disinformation. But I would argue that is, when you think about like all the different areas that communicators are responsible for, one that we actually talk about the least in terms of what we are doing to stop disinformation, I would say is organizations aren't really doing as much as they probably should to stop disinformation from a societal level.
So that's who should be combating it. And then the people that we think are the best, that are actually doing the best work at combating disinformation, well, it's me.
It's
And it's
me.
people like me. I'm going to call it, it's a little bit of a, to me, that's a difficult response to get because it shows that we haven't really made a lot of advancement in the last few years if people are still feeling that they're the best at it. Yes, people do think there's fact-checking websites. Only about half of Americans say that they're combating disinformation well. Local broadcast journalists, less than half in terms of, there isn't really anyone who's combating it well is what's happening.
Okay. All right. So the slide that Dave just presented and the one that I presented, these slides are now combined together. And what we're looking at on this slide is who should be combating it and how well they are actually doing. And what you can see is a big percentage point difference. For example, the US government, 69% believe they are very responsible for combating it, but only 33% said that they are doing so at least somewhat well. So the difference in percentage points is 36, which is a very significant gap. And for a lot of them, you do see a fairly significant gap in terms of how well they are doing. A couple noteworthy ones are fact-checking websites that people do believe they're responsible, but they're doing somewhat well. And also we see the local broadcast and local news again, that there's also a very small gap. It's one of the smaller gaps for media sources with the local broadcast and print news. But for most of them, that they clearly people believe that they should be doing a better job than they actually are doing.
Yeah. And then, so Kim's question in the chat, so how do we stop this? No, you can go to the next
Okay.
slide. And some of it comes from people want some warning labels. And I look at this and I look at the last slides that we've been talking about who should be combating it. Social media platforms are high in terms of what they could be doing, according to Americans. Social media platforms could be adding warning labels to posts that contain disinformation. They should be proactively removing disinformation from their platforms. So it's the old, if you find it, let's get rid of it before it goes too far perspective. There should be specific regulations. So again, the government should be imposing regulations on this because they're people that we trust to try and fix this. And there should also be legal or financial penalties to people that are knowingly seeding disinformation across the country. 75% agree that companies and brands should take a stronger role in combating disinformation. And to me, as someone who is also an educator, I think the last point is a very important one, and that 79% of people think that we should be teaching students how to recognize and critically evaluate disinformation. I mean, it's really interesting in that we're talking about teaching financial literacy to the next generation. We also need to be teaching uh, disinformation literacy, information literacy to the next generation as well.
Yeah, Dave, I was really surprised that some of these numbers were as high as they were. I think because so this is a new series of questions that we added to this one. And when Dave and I were working on the survey with Olivia on our team, it was really interesting because we were just trying to like, okay, well, do you think people should be charged for spreading disinformation? So it'd be interesting if we added a little more severe consequences, how people would feel about it. But also the number that, nearly 8 out of 10 people do believe that you should have some sort of information literacy or media literacy. And that's another point to make is that a lot of organizations don't teach information literacy or media literacy even to their employees, even though research does show that it has significant benefits even to critical thinking skills. And when your employees are sharing information, that will also help them become smarter at recognizing what is disinformation.
I think one of the challenges that we have coming out of that is as long as people feel that they're the best source of identifying misinformation and disinformation, we'll never know to what degree that it should be. So the fact that 5% disagreed with this, those are probably 5%, and I trust the data, that's a large group of people who think they know what's going on from a misinformation, disinformation standpoint, and they may be knowingly passing it on, they just don't believe they are. So it's identifying, raising awareness, letting people know that this is an issue beyond what we can identify and work with will help us to get further along in terms of media literacy.
Absolutely. Okay, so we asked the question, we asked the question like, how often, if ever, do you come across news or information that you believe misrepresents reality or is false? So more like misinformation. And what we do see is that people say that they are encountering disinformation more often. So 47% of our respondents said that they see it every day or almost every day. And then 1/3 said at least once a week. And then it goes on from there, which means that you have about 80% of our respondents who said that they encounter it at least once per week.
And when they do encounter it, just under half, so 44% of people saying that they are always or often going to other sites to verify credibility of sources. So if there's something that seems a bit off, they are going to other sites to get that extra verification happening. That being said, 84% are confident in their own ability to recognize if it's real or false. So only when I recognize that it might be an issue am I going to other sites to visit, because I have full belief in my own ability to recognize news or information that misrepresents reality.
It's interesting. All right. So then we want to find out like where are people actually getting their news? And this has been consistent that the number one source is television. And so 31% of our respondents said that television is their top source, and then followed by social media. So 50% of the respondents, or 52% specifically, are getting their information from television and social media. And then when we ask how often do they share news or other information on social networks, I mean, most people aren't really sharing information on their social networks, but you do have almost 14% who are sharing information on social almost every day. And then you have some who are sharing it like once a week. So that's really interesting in terms of people's habits. Now, we asked about sharing. But then we didn't ask like, well, how often are you on social media every day and such, lurking, those lurkers.
But in terms of what, we talk about where they're going for their news and are they sharing the news, 43% of Americans say they are avoiding the news because of disinformation. So they just don't know who to trust or what to believe. So they're avoiding watching, reading, or listening to the news because of the amount of disinformation. So this becomes a bit of a spiral. I'm avoiding news. I don't trust the news. I trust other people unless we get people finding ways, or we have institutions finding ways to get through to people the proper news. No one will ever learn from this. And that's to me, that's a scary point.
Yeah, Dave, I have to completely agree with you. The fact that it's also increasing is worrisome as well, that people are avoiding the news. So then you wonder, well, how are you getting the information? And are you turning to alternative sources that may not be factual sources or giving information that is necessary? All right, so what we wanted to do was include a couple guides, and we can share these also post webinar. But IPR has done a lot of work in the disinformation space. We have a communicator's guide to COVID-19 vaccinations, and that was even though it was specifically during COVID-19, there's a lot of really cool research and theories and models that talk about how people, some really great behavioral science models like the COMBI model, in terms of like how people process information and how you pre-bunk and all these really great theories that we have. And then last year, we did publish a how communicators can help manage election disinformation in the workplace that my colleague Olivia and I put together. And there's some really great tips in there that aren't even just related to elections, but for evermore. And then we also have a 10 ways to combat misinformation, which is a behavioral insights approach. And then we have a checklist in terms of how to stop the spread of disinformation, which have this really cool think before you link. And if you read these, what it does is it tells you before you share anything, because we are the ones who are responsible for, even though we say who's responsible for spreading disinformation, technically it's really all of us are responsible for spreading and combating it. Even though we do say we're doing really well. But one of the things you hear is like, how does it make me feel? Have I verified it? Do I know enough about the topic? Who shared it, right? Where's the original source that I'm getting this from? Does it create distrust or sow division? If it does, then it probably is misinformation or disinformation. So there's all sorts of questions people can ask before they actually share the post. And then shout out to my colleague, Sarah and the comms team, including Brittany and Avery, who ran Disinformation Awareness Month, which will be every April. And there's a mini masterclass that you could take. There's really great sources and even cool GPTs that Michael Charenson created that allows you to put in a post and it will tell you the likelihood that it's disinformation. So really cool stuff with Disinformation Awareness Month. And you can take the test no matter what time of the year. It doesn't have to be during the month, but we have a really great source on there that you can check out. And then we also have a really great disinformation resource library that has all sorts of materials. And then last is the report itself. And I'll leave this up for just a second and then I'll stop sharing my screen so we can take questions because I can't really see the questions since I was sharing my screen. But please connect with Dave and me. And here's a link to our QR codes, to our pages. Feel free to reach out to us. And then we also have a QR code for the report itself. So then you can download it and check it out yourself. All right, now it's time for questions. There's a lot.
Mm.
Hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now so I can see better. Stop. I did not stop the recording. I almost stopped the recording, Brittany, and I know you would have killed me. So
Well, while you're checking it out, I'm going to go to a question from Sabrina talking about, did we look at tools to confirm the legitimacy of information? We asked people, are they going to check? We're not asking what tools are they overlaying, or do they feel, are they using different AI tools to identify if something is misinformation or not? But we do see people generally believing about half of them are going to other sources, whatever that may be, to check if something's valid or not.
okay, great. Mary Beth West. Hi, Mary Beth. What precise percentage of Democrats compose the total of those surveyed? Dave will probably have to dig into that. Dave, do you know?
I will work on that while you're answering the next question.
Okay, cool. All right, Kim Keller with a big question. The big question from Kim is, how should disinformation be stopped? All right, so I know that you probably asked this before we covered the different what people want to do, but however, the reality of whether people will be fined for spreading disinformation isn't probably going to happen. But there are some very tangible suggestions that companies can do. One is that companies can invest in media literacy classes for their employees. And if they really wanted to, they could also offer it to the community. The other thing that we could do to stop disinformation is to support local journalism. There's usually a bill in Congress, which there is right now, to help build up and support local journalism. There's some really cool nonprofits, foundations that are supporting startups. I'll just give you a quick statistic. Since 2005, 1/3 of all local news organizations have shut down, which has left communities in news deserts, which means they don't really have access to local news. I was just talking about this with my husband because there was a shooting, like probably not too far from my house. I live in Seattle. And we would have never known about it if we didn't see it through local news, right? We would have just gone on our way and had no idea. So local news is really critically important. But there's been, since the good news is for the past few years, they're doing different startup models for local journalism, whether they're nonprofits or for profits, but they're trying to sort of revamp and revitalize local journalism. So organizations can help purchase with help with advertising, subscriptions, all sorts of different things that they can do to support local journalism. And the other part that you could easily do is check your ad spend. Billions of dollars are spent by companies every year who buy packages of ads. And what they're doing is also working against their best interests because they're advertising and promoting on like fake news websites. But I do think that, and then the media literacy point for schools is also really important. So advocating, it's taught in your public school system. Like for example, my son, he was the only one of my 3 kids to get like media literacy classes, but that was an optional class, and it wasn't like he selected it as the first option they put him in it. But he absolutely loved that class. And it's not just for kids. Like clearly, information literacy is needed for people of all ages, and not even just people in PR, but people in society. It makes you better consumers of health information. So there's all sorts of things that we can do to combat disinformation. But as people do want organizations and companies to take a bigger role in that. I don't know, Dave, if you have anything to add.
No, but I found the answer for the Republicans and Democrats.
Awesome.
We had 35% of the sample were Republicans, 34% were Democrats, 16% didn't vote, and then 12% independents, and then the rest fell out by other parties. So
Fantastic.
consistent results.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yes, the presentation will be recorded and sent to participants. Okay, so one of the questions is, what are the current laws in the US that can be used to curtail disinformation? So one of the laws that we have, and maybe Dave, you could talk about Canada. I know US would never spread disinformation about Canada, of course. However, one of the current laws that we have are defamation laws. So we have had cases where people will sue for defamation. We've seen it with Rudy Giuliani, he had defamed election workers and was sued and lost. We also had Alex Jones in the US, who was a conservative radio host, and he was sued by parents of Sandy Hook because Alex claimed that the Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax, and the court decision was millions of dollars. So that's the way that they typically do it, is defamation lawsuits. However, in reality, that is a pretty severe impact, and you have to prove that it's damaged your reputation, and you have to go find a lawyer who will take your case. It could take years in the court. As far as social media companies, there is not as much repercussions if you're Facebook spreading disinformation or any social media platforms, because we do have the Telecommunications Act that doesn't hold internet providers responsible for the spread of disinformation. So there are a lot of laws in place that protect companies and allow them to spread disinformation. So as far as, I don't know, Dave, if there's anything you can add to that or anything I'm missing.
Well, I'm going to say from a Canada perspective, we're a much less litigious population.
We
Uh,
like to sue, Dave. We will sue.
I know.
Just we love to sue. So there.
Um, but that being said, we have some rules that came in the last laws that came in the last little while where we don't have news broadcast through social media in the same way. Because there was taxes that were going to be provided to the social media companies, and they decided to not share news anymore. So a lot of our social media is shared by people like me. So we're not necessarily looking at large organizations. We don't necessarily get ABC, NBC, CBC News the same way that you do coming through social media.
Yeah, I will also add, I was reading the comments and I just want to add someone, Deanna, hi, Deanna. She added that there's a first day executive order condemning mis and disinformation research. And that is 100% true. And what we even saw recently is that like disinformation research was one of the markers along with DE&I that should not be included in federal grants. There's been a few cases where we've seen the effects of that when Biden appointed like a disinformation panel, he put Nina Jankowicz in charge of it. And she was so inundated by disinformation that after 3 weeks, it had to be disbanded. And then we also have a great case of Renee DeRosta, who was at the Stanford Internet Observatory. And she just published a book called Invisible Rulers about disinformation. And her case is that they basically took her down with all her disinformation research. And she was a Stanford University researcher, and Stanford honestly didn't stand by her and say, this is the research we're doing, this is legitimate. And so there are attacks disinformation, and not to talk about IPR's business, but we've also been attacked like our website because of the work that we've been doing disinformation. Sarah is traumatized because she spent a lot of time dealing with like hackers and all sorts of stuff that come for IPR because of our disinformation research. So see, she's laughing because that's the only way we can.
That's the only reaction you can have to this.
So I know we've had to like really ramp up our security on our website. I think there was one day where we had like 1 million hits or something, Sarah, on our website. So we are seeing the impact specifically as well. So a couple other comments. Jen, oh, hi, Jen. She said that it's a circular issue. If the folks
Yeah.
responsible for creating the issue are responsible for remedying it, it feels like a recipe of more of the same in the trust spiral. Okay, are you lumping traditional cable in with streaming services and YouTube's as TV as an information source? No. So one of the things that we do is when we ask the questions, which we put in that one question where we ask cable news or whatever, we do lump them together, but YouTube is not part of it. That's part of social media. But when we get into the trusted sources and we say, YouTube, Fox News, whatever, we do ask about all the individual sources. So any of the mainstream media sources, we ask those individually, and we also ask every social media platform individually. And one of the reasons why we make sure that we ask those individually is because we find like Facebook and TikTok are not as trusted as and X as trusted as LinkedIn, Snapchat, and some of the others. It's same thing with mainstream media, cable news, that sort of thing. Like Fox News is different than MSNBC, which is different than CNN. But for that one question, we do lump them together, but for all the others that we do not.
Ian talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect and what at
Oh,
play and
Ian,
being able to
hi,
know
Ian.
what's fake news or not. And I think Ian, in 2022, we asked people, we gave people half the population in the survey got a question that talked about masks. And of course, we're in the heart of COVID at the time, but masks were effective at eliminating the spread of or diminishing the spread of COVID, and the other half got the statement of masks do no effect. And it was really interesting, depending, and then we did this in Canada. So, depending on your political slant or where you lived in Canada, you had a different view of what was disinformation. So for certain population, wearing a mask stops COVID is disinformation. In the other part, that was true information. So it really comes down to if we're the ones assessing what is disinformation, it gets back to that spiral that someone talked before. We're in trouble.
Absolutely. Maybe we can talk for a moment, Dave, about AI. One, I think it's Semil or Simile George says that use of AI is contributing. Voices of actual people are being replicated and placed onto images. How can it be regulated? So I can comment on this, Dave, and then turn it over to you. There's significant, and this is where we have to get into educating people and be sophisticated. I was just in Hong Kong. We were doing a presentation last week talking about navigating truth. And we were talking about cases that had happened in Hong Kong, happened here too, where people have transferred large sums of money because they get on a call with who they believe is their CEO and it sounds just like them. And then they transfer the money over to some other account that who's made like millions of dollars off this sort of scam. And Sam Stark, who's the director of our Digital Media Research Center, I believe, oh, Dave, I think maybe you have been there last year for that presentation she did. And they have these influencers that are 100% fake and they have fake voices. And I could tell the little girl because her fingers all messed up and she's way too many wrinkles. But like some of these influencers, I can't even tell the difference that they're fake people, to be honest. So I think it's just going to get worse and worse from this point, which is why we have to educate people on it. But Dave,
Well, and our trust overall of AI is just increasing in terms of in all aspects of it. So in the early days, when we heard something was being done by AI, we had visions of Arnold Schwarzenegger fighting robots from the future. Now we have a different image. It seems to be okay. It's becoming more commonplace. And the more it becomes more commonplace, maybe we become a little more relaxed or lax on what we allow it to do. And it's going to get better. Those extra fingers on that girl's hands, if someone redid that photo now, they'd be gone because there are some amazing AI images out there. We just had an election in Canada, and shortly after the election, there was a deep fake going around of the new prime minister saying things about policy that were not true, were not what he had said. So someone had fixed that. And how do we identify that when it goes? I don't have an answer as to how it can be regulated, but it's something that we need to make sure that social media platforms are calling it out when it's recognized as there or removing it outright.
I mean, absolutely. I was even watching an interview the other day with Caitlin Clark on TikTok, and it was clearly fake, right? Like her mouth wasn't even making sense. But it's just going to get better and better. So it'll be. But there's a really great. Not to this is please don't go down this rabbit hole, but I'm going to give everyone a suggestion. If you Google Will Smith eating spaghetti AI. It's like really weird. You'll see like the old version of AI Will Smith eating spaghetti. You want to watch it for maybe 5 seconds and then you're so like horrified by it. But then they have today's Will Smith eating spaghetti and you can see how sophisticated. There's still some minor tweaks that should be made, but it's so much more sophisticated than it used to be. I love the Dunning Kruger effect, and I absolutely believe it's at play. And I think that is also the case where they say I do a really good job of uh, and I check my sources before I share stuff. So there is a lot of that. Like I'm an authority, but not an authority. So there.
There's
Okay,
other questions around the demographic breakout of the. This
that's
is
all you, Dave.
This survey is representative of the American population, regionally by age, by education, by sex. So don't worry about that aspect. This is representative of the American population.
Okay, Dave, we're going to speculate. You ready to speculate?
Sure.
Now, this is good. As
Is
a
this going to
researcher,
be misinformation? Are we about to spread
I
something
don't
not
know.
true?
Are you going to tell us? The reason why I can ask you this question is because we do have data to support this, but we just haven't updated it. So, one of the questions people ask was how this would transfer to Canada, if at all. Like, what do we see in Canada versus the US? So, I'll let you take that and then I'll add my 2 cents. We didn't
So
ask about Mark Carney because he's so new. So, you know.
my answer is in 2022 on IPR's website or on IPR's website, there's a 2022 study that we did that very specifically asked these questions about for Canadians to see where it's at, and it's not much different than where we're at. There is a higher trust for those Canadians on. For those who aren't Canadians, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk Canadian for a second. There's a higher trust for CBC across political stripes than there is, say, for mainstream media in the US. Although that was 3 years ago, I'm sure it's changed a little bit just in the course of this last election we had. So there's slightly higher trust, but in general, it's going in the same direction.
Hey, Dave, can you just, I know this, but do you want to tell people what CBC is in case they don't know?
It's the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It is a government-funded national broadcaster.
Yes. And I do remember this from our study that Canadians were much more confident in the CBC than Americans are in PBS, which would be
Yes.
our equivalent. So
Yeah,
yeah.
very much so. PBS, any of the mainstream media news, and that, like I say, that gap between conservatives and liberals, which are Republicans and Democrats, if you want to draw it on the same lines, was much less in that respects.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so here's okay, Ian Bailey did talk about the voices from C-suite on earnings calls. Jen said she asked about streaming sources because you can get ABC on different cable providers. From an ad buy perspective, these audience are watching technically the same news channel and receiving a different blend of commercials. Considering how ads augment, amplify the perception of news program is interesting to explore further, perhaps. Yeah, it is. The advertising element is really interesting for sure. Um, is there any evidence you found of foreign media influence in the disinformation space? I know that we have seen evidence of it, especially around elections, is typically when they report that foreign influence in the disinformation space. Now, with this study, we typically stick to U.S. sources, but we do add in the Financial Times, BBC. That is a little more global in nature. We have asked about Al Jazeera, but we took that out because the numbers were so low in terms of people who actually use it. So, Kim Blanchett, a plug for Leger in the 2025 State of PR survey. So Kim's given the Canadian endorsement here, which just closed for the CPRS National Conference this weekend. So CPRS is the equivalent of PRSA in the US. And let me see. I'm trying to see if we missed anything. Um, a couple of people asked about the age group breakout for the data, but it mirrors the US population.
It does.
Yeah,
And we didn't, to be fair, we didn't find a lot of differences across age groups significantly different. This is a population issue, not necessarily an age issue.
absolutely. Oh, let me see. Were there any questions? Questions? Oh, there's Q&A. Let me look at this. Oh, hi, Lucas. Um, okay, so here's what Lucas said. Okay, great report. Thank you. I have to read that aloud because I love compliments. There's a debate in the disinformation community about whether this is primarily a problem of A, the spread of information most people agree is false, or B, lack of agreement about what the facts are, such as stolen elections, global warming. When people disagree on the facts, combating misinformation is seen as censorship. How
Yeah.
can we address that view?
That's a tough one because, and yeah, it goes to something that I think Pat mentioned in the chat as well about people not knowingly sharing disinformation. They're just seeing something they agree with and they're passing it along. And that's what makes this the hardest to fight overall. What is correct? What is the right answer to this? It's almost like we need an independent body that can assess these things. Because if the independent body says it's not accurate, then it's not censorship. You're simply removing something. Because we also saw comments on First Amendment rights. How do we not let people state their point of view, whether it's wrong or not? I don't have answers to these. Tina, do you?
No, I don't have any answers,
You're
but
just going to let me ramble on there, knowing that I wasn't going to get anywhere to an answer.
I know I was going to let you do it. What I will say is that we did see that 12% of people knowingly shared disinformation. So that people do believe that people aren't, the truth is variable, right? It doesn't mean, but facts are very different. And you could say, well, one person's facts or another person's, but there are facts and there are interpretation of facts. So that's some of the challenges. There's some really great research that NYU does in their like the behavioral science department. And one of the researchers there, Ani Sternisco, they did a really cool study that looked at what personality factors cause people to share disinformation, knowing that it's false. And there was a really interesting personality trait called, it was like narcissism, national narcissism. So when you share information on that has to do with the government that you know is false, well, you have this national narcissism, which means that you believe that the country and sort of your perspective on government trumps everything else.
Yeah.
So because of that, that you will share disinformation knowingly, and you don't care as much about your reputation as you do to convince others of why your point is correct, even if it's false news, but it's there to make a point. It's a really fascinating study. I highly suggest you all read. It was like one of the bigger variables than anything else, this sort of personality characteristic. So if you can check out some of that research, it's really cool. Did we do all the questions, Dave? Is
So
this
there's still more rolling in, but there are more comments than
okay?
anything, I think. I think we're
Pat
good.
Ford, all these great people.
Thank you everyone for commenting and
Yes, this
contributing
is
to
so
this.
great. And it's great to see a lot. We have the great Elevate members like Liz. I Along those lines, it would be interesting to see people's response to social media disclaimers, if they even believe what the disclaimers say versus preferring to believe what they deem to be fact. I mean, absolutely. There's got to be experiments. We could even look for them and see publishing them in our research letter that Olivia and Mariam on our team run. Is like, what is the research? How do disclaimers impact people's perceptions of the content? Now, what we do find, there's a couple things that I will comment on, and then we can wrap it up. Is we do look at, there's been a lot of research on pre-bunking, which means if you know sort of what disinformation is coming out, that you can warn people in terms of that specific disinformation, which does decrease the amount of disinformation. Labeling, there is research on labeling specifically that it does have a positive impact on disinformation. But there's also some issues with labeling as well, because it's inconsistent. Sometimes it could actually cause like a backfire effect. So there's great stuff there. Ian said that this has been highly informative, albeit a little dispiriting. Fear not, Ian. We'll get through this, maybe. So, but thank you all for being here today. We'll make sure we'll send this recording out after, and we'll also save this and send some of the great resources out. But I want to thank Dave and the Leger team. Dave's been a great partner in the study. He and the Leger team are absolute joy to work with. So we want to thank you, Dave, for being an amazing trustee and an amazing
Thank
partner.
you.
Is there
Thank
anything
you
you want to
for
add,
doing this.
Dave, from your perch in Canada?
Sorry?
Do you want to add anything to close
No,
out?
I just want to comment on Pat's comment that Canada will always be a sovereign nation. Thank you, Pat, for pointing that out. And whatever disinformation or misinformation people have heard about Canada changing that, that will never happen, according to quote our new prime minister.
You heard it here for the 100th time. So there we go. Brittany, anything we need to know before you close us out?
Nope, but you will all receive this recording and the resources in your inbox as well. It'll be on our website and YouTube channel for future watching. So thanks for joining us. Thanks, Tina and
Thanks,
Dave.
everyone. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.